Dallas just got linked to two absolute monster edge rushers, and one of them could completely flip this defense overnight. But the cost is going to make your head spin. And before we dive into whether the Cowboys should go all in on a blockbuster trade or chase the biggest name in free agency, hit that subscribe button right now because we break down every Cowboys move the second it happens, and you do not want to miss what could be the wildest offseason Dallas has had in years. So here's what just dropped. ESPN's Jeremy Fowler put out a report connecting the Cowboys to both Maxx Crosby from the Raiders and Trey Hendrickson from the Bengals. And we're talking about two completely different scenarios here. Crosby would cost you draft capital, and probably a lot of it, because you're prying him away from Las Vegas in a trade. Hendrickson, on the other hand, is expected to hit free agency, which means it's a bidding war with cash, not picks. So the question is, which path do the Cowboys actually take, and can they afford either one without completely blowing up their cap situation? Let's start with Maxx Crosby, because this has been the story that won't go away. Every time you think the trade rumors are dead, they come roaring back to life. And here's what we know right now. Fowler reported that Crosby hasn't even talked to the Raiders since the season ended. So there's been no trade request, no formal conversations, nothing like that. He's supposedly close with owner Mark Davis, and the expectation is that Crosby, Davis, the GM, Tom Telesco, and the new head coach Antonio Pierce are all going to sit down at some point and hash this out. But here's the thing that matters most. Crosby has made it crystal clear that he wants to win, and he wants to win now. Whether he's formally asked out or not, the writing is on the wall. The Raiders are nowhere close to contending, and Crosby knows it. His loyalty to Vegas has been unreal, but that loyalty is about to get tested harder than it ever has, because the trade interest in this guy is absolutely insane. Fowler believes that somewhere between a dozen and possibly 20 teams are going to call the Raiders about Crosby. And honestly, that tracks, because think about it this way. Maxx Crosby is the best player you can possibly acquire this offseason. You're not signing anyone in free agency who's better than him. You're not drafting anyone at pick 12 or pick 20 who's even close to his level right now. This is a guy who, despite missing time over the last 4 years, has played more defensive snaps than any other edge rusher in the entire league over that span. Nobody has been on the field more than Maxx Crosby. So when you talk about availability and durability, yeah, he's had injuries. But he's also been out there grinding more than anyone else. And the crazy part is, the Cowboys were specifically named as one of 6 teams with serious interest. The others were the Ravens, Bills, Lions, Niners, and Buccaneers. All contenders, all teams that are one elite edge rusher away from taking the next step. So where does that leave Dallas? Here's the problem. If you've got 20 teams calling, or even just 10 teams calling, that's a bidding war. And bidding wars get expensive, fast. Some reports have suggested it could cost you the same kind of compensation you'd get for trading Micah Parsons, which is absolutely wild. Other reports, like from Ian Rappaport, say it's more like a first-round pick. But if you're the Raiders, and you've got 10 teams offering you a first-rounder, you're going to squeeze more out of it. You're going to ask for a first and a third, or a first and a player, or multiple picks. That's just how it works when the market is that hot. And look, I get it. The thought of trading away premium assets for a guy who just had meniscus surgery and is rehabbing right now might make you nervous. But let's be real. This is Maxx Crosby we're talking about. The dude has been a monster year in and year out. And if you can get him healthy for the start of the season, or even a few weeks into the season, you've just added an absolute game wrecker to a defense that desperately needs one. And by the way, Crosby himself addressed all the trade noise recently. He went on Colin Cowherd's show and said that now that he's been quiet, random people are making big statements about him and acting like he told them things personally. He basically laughed it off and said he knows his truth, and he's in the building every day from 6 in the morning until almost 2 in the afternoon, just getting healthy and working. Now here's what's interesting. He didn't say, "I don't want to be traded." He didn't say, "I'm a Raider for life." He just said he's focused on his rehab and staying locked in. And oh yeah, he wasn't wearing any Raiders gear during that interview, which people definitely noticed. So you can read into that however you want. But the bottom line is this. If you're the Cowboys, you have to make that phone call to Vegas. There is zero reason not to at least check in and see what the price tag is. And it's not a coincidence that Dallas went out of their way to praise Crosby after they played the Raiders this past season. You don't do that unless you're at least planting a seed for the future. Now, if I'm the Raiders and I don't want to move him, here's the pitch. New head coach Antonio Pierce comes in and says, "Look, we can turn this thing around fast. Remember what happened in Seattle with the Seahawks when Pete Carroll showed up? They won a Super Bowl in 2 years. We can do the same thing here. You want to be on a winner? Stick with us and we'll build around you." And that might be enough to convince Crosby to run it back for another year or two. But this story isn't going away anytime soon. And if the Cowboys are serious about fixing this pass rush, they need to be aggressive here. Now let's talk about Trey Hendrickson, because this is the other big name. And it's a totally different situation. Hendrickson is expected to hit free agency after his relationship with the Bengals has basically run its course. There was some chatter about Cincinnati possibly using the franchise tag on him and then trying to work out a sign and trade. But that feels unlikely for a bunch of reasons. First of all, the franchise tag number for edge rushers is projected to be over $34 million, which is astronomical. Second, the Bengals would have to find a trade partner who's willing to give up an asset and pay Hendrickson what he wants. And everyone else knows they can just wait it out and sign him without giving up a pick. So it's a game of chicken that probably doesn't end with a tag and trade. The more realistic scenario is Hendrickson walks in free agency and the Bengals get a compensatory pick back. Probably a third rounder if they play their cards right. But here's why a tag and trade could still be on the table. If the Bengals lose Hendrickson for just a comp pick, it limits how much they can spend in free agency. Because comp picks are based on what you lose versus what you sign. So if they want to be active in free agency, they might prefer to tag and trade him so they're not handcuffed. It's complicated, but it's something to keep an eye on. Assuming Hendrickson does hit the open market, the Cowboys were named as one of 3 teams with strong interest. The other 2 were the Bucs, who apparently are ready to make a big splash at edge, and the Colts, which makes sense because their defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo was Hendrickson's DC in Cincinnati for years. So there's a connection there, and you know how much coaches love reuniting with their guys. Now let's talk about Hendrickson's production, because it dipped this past season, and you can't ignore that. The 2 years before, when he was trying to get paid, he put up 17.5 sacks in back-to-back seasons, which is elite. This past year, he only had 8 sacks, and injuries were a big part of that. So the question is, do you pay him $20 or $25 million per year based on what he did 2 years ago? Or do you worry that the decline is the start of a trend? I think he's still an upgrade over what Dallas has right now. There's no question about that. But the cost is a real conversation. If you're giving him a massive contract and he can't stay healthy, or he's not the same player anymore, that's a problem. But if you can get him on a reasonable deal and he bounces back to that 17.5 sack form, you just hit a home run. Here's the bigger picture for the Cowboys. It is not even a little bit surprising that they're being linked to edge rushers. Because let's be honest, this is the biggest need on the entire roster. Even if you bring back Jadeveon Clowney, which I think most of us want to see happen, and you've got guys like Marshawn Kneeland and Chauncey Golston and Carl Lawson under contract, you're still at least one quality edge rusher short. Right now, the depth chart has Kneeland, Carl Lawson, and Chauncey Golston as your top guys. If Micah Parsons is playing linebacker full-time, and that is not going to cut it. Jerry Jones spent all last season talking about how the Cowboys had the best defensive end group they've ever had, which was just his way of refusing to admit they missed Micah Parsons when he got hurt. But the reality is, They have to add help this offseason, and it needs to be significant help. I don't want to get to the draft and be in a position where the Cowboys feel like they have to take the best available edge rusher at pick 12 or pick 20 just because there's a massive gaping hole on the roster. And here's the problem with that strategy. There might not be an edge rusher worth taking at 12 or 20. The board might not fall that way. And then you're either reaching for a guy or you're passing on better players at other positions. I would much rather see Dallas sign someone, whether it's Hendrickson or even a cheaper option in that $7 to $10 million per year range, and then go into the draft with flexibility. Because sometimes these young edge rushers need time to develop, and you can't just plug them in and expect them to be stars right away. The Cowboys need someone who can contribute immediately, not a project. So what does all this mean for Dallas moving forward? If they go after Maxx Crosby, they're going all in on win-now mode. You're trading away valuable draft capital and probably paying him a big contract extension, but you're getting a guy who's one of the 5 best edge rushers in football. If they chase Trey Hendrickson in free agency, it's less risk in terms of assets because you're not giving up picks, but it's still a huge financial commitment, and you're banking on him staying healthy and bouncing back. And honestly, both of these moves would signal that the front office is finally ready to be aggressive and stop sitting on their hands every offseason. Cowboys fans are tired of hearing about how they're going to be players in free agency and then watching them sign a bunch of bargain bin guys. This is the year to go get someone who actually moves the needle. And the crazy part is, you could theoretically do both. You could trade for Crosby and sign a cheaper free agent edge rusher to fill out the depth. Or you could sign Hendrickson and still draft an edge rusher later in the draft. The key is not leaving the offseason with the same group you had last year, because we all saw how that worked out. Now let's talk about what this means for the locker room and the coaching staff. If Dallas pulls off a trade for Maxx Crosby that sends a message to everyone that this team is serious about winning right now, it tells Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb and the rest of the core that management is willing to go all in. It also takes pressure off Micah Parsons because you're not asking him to do everything on his own. He can move around more. He can play linebacker on early downs and then rush the passer in obvious passing situations. You've got Crosby on one side, Micah on the other, and suddenly this defense looks completely different. Same thing with Hendrickson. If you sign him, you're adding a proven veteran who knows how to get after the quarterback, and you're giving Mike Zimmer a real weapon to work with. And here's what nobody is talking about. Adding a guy like Crosby or Hendrickson could actually help the secondary, because quarterbacks don't have as much time to throw. You don't need your corners to cover for 4 or 5 seconds if the quarterback is getting hit in 2.5 seconds. So this move has a ripple effect across the entire defense. From a cap space perspective, this is where it gets tricky. The Cowboys are tight against the cap right now, and they've got decisions to make on a bunch of other guys. They need to figure out what they're doing with Terrence Steele. They need to decide if they're bringing back any of their own free agents. Every dollar you spend on a Maxx Crosby or a Trey Hendrickson is a dollar you can't spend somewhere else. But here's my take on that. You have to prioritize. You have to identify the positions where you absolutely cannot go into next season with a weakness, and edge rusher is at the top of that list. If you have to let a few depth pieces walk or restructure some contracts to make room for an elite edge rusher, you do it. Because the difference between having a guy like Crosby and not having him could be the difference between winning the division and missing the playoffs. Looking ahead to next season, if the Cowboys land one of these guys, the entire outlook changes. Suddenly, you're not just hoping to compete in the NFC East. You're a legitimate threat to make a deep playoff run. The defense goes from being a question mark to being a strength, and you've got the pieces on offense to score with anybody. So if you can get stops and create turnovers and pressure the quarterback, you're in every game. But if you whiff on edge rusher in both the trade market and free agency, and you go into the draft empty-handed, you're basically punting on the season before it even starts. Because we've seen what this defense looks like without a real pass rush, and it's not pretty. Quarterbacks have all day to throw, the secondary gets exposed, and you end up in shootouts that you can't win. Here's my final take on all of this. The Cowboys need to be aggressive. They need to pick up the phone and call the Raiders about Maxx Crosby, and if the price is too steep, they need to be ready to outbid everyone for Trey Hendrickson in free agency. Sitting back and hoping you can find a diamond in the rough in the 4th round is not a strategy that wins championships. This is the time to make a splash. This is the time to show the fan base that you're serious. And look, I know Jerry Jones loves to talk about going all in, but we need to see it actually happen. We need to see the Cowboys make a move that makes every other team in the NFC nervous. And if you're a fan watching this, you need to make your voice heard. Drop a comment right now and tell me which guy you want. Do you want Maxx Crosby, even if it costs a 1st-round pick? Or do you want Trey Hendrickson in free agency? Or do you think the Cowboys should go in a completely different direction? I want to hear what you think, because this is the biggest decision Dallas is going to make this offseason, and it's going to define what kind of team we are next year. And before you go, make sure you're subscribed, because we're going to be covering every single update on this story, from the first phone call to the final contract. This is Cowboys Live News, and we don't miss anything. So hit that subscribe button, drop a comment with your take, and let's see if Jerry and Stephen Jones actually have the guts to pull the trigger on one of these guys. I'll see you in the next one.